Chapter 10. Ambush at Briar Pass. Clayton and Rio sat atop their horses in the shadows of an alley, watching and waiting for the colonel to drive his rented rig out of town with the girl at his side. The night air was turning colder, and Jack wished he had had time to get a jacket, but that would have entailed returning to the jail for his bag, and he didn't want to give Rio any cause for suspicion. Finally, the rig emerged from the livery and rolled down the darkened street. They waited until the team and wagon had completely disappeared from sight, allowing them to get a good head start before angling their mounts out of the shadows and slowly riding at a walking pace, following their quarry out of town. They were completely unaware of the eyes watching them go, and of the shadowy figure that was about to set out on their trail, also. Clayton and Rio followed the trail for a while, keeping well behind and out of sight of the colonel's team. Stars twinkled brilliantly in the clear, crisp purple sky, casting a silvery glow on the grassy meadows and revealing the jagged, mountainous horizon far to the east and making night travel an easy task. Although Clayton had been to the colonel's home just this afternoon, he would not have been able to find his way back, especially in the dark. Rio knew the country well and knew the route the colonel would be taking. After a few minutes of following the trail, Rio motioned for them to swing off the road to cut cross-country, angling their mounts up the dew-covered grassy slopes until they topped a ridge overlooking the trail through Briar Pass to Antelope Valley. Down below, they could see the colonel's rig lumbering along, the team pulling at a steady, even gait. Jack knew this was a good place for an ambush. As the pass narrowed, the wagon, horses, and passengers would be confined to a straight-ahead route and less likely to be able to evade attackers. Directly below them now, Rio and Jack could plainly see the colonel and the girl on the wagon seat. Jack knew this was his job, so he had to appear to take the lead. He pulled his six-shooter from its holster, and holding it high, he said to Rio, "Let's do it!" and kicked the big red stallion in the ribs, sending him sliding on the wet grass down the slope toward the trail. Rio, taken by surprise of Jack's sudden action, pulled his pistol and pushed his horse recklessly behind him. The colonel saw the movement on the slope to his right. He whipped up the reins and shouted, "Hee-yah!" sending the team into a galloping dead run. Clayton opened fire, although out of range for a pistol. The shot thundered across the valley, echoing against the far hills. The colonel stood up in the wagon, whipping the team to a faster, frenzied speed. Tamara let out a scream, clutching the seat rail with a death grip, trying to maintain her balance as the rig slewed left and right along the winding, bumpy trail. Jack, urging the big red forward with heels drumming against his powerful rib cage, was closing the gap now. He was well within six-gun range now. He fired again, too high to hit a mark, making sure that he only made noise and doing no damage. Rio was pushing his mount hard and was pulling up abreast of Jack. Rio fired again. Then again as Jack's horse veered almost into him, forcing his shot to go wild. Then, with surprise, a rifle blasted, and Rio felt a slug plow into the top of his left shoulder. He wobbled in the saddle, pulling his horse up sharply, slowing its pace to an unsteady canter. He clutched at the bleeding, gaping hole with his right hand, still grasping his shooter, and looked to the rim of the pass directly ahead and off to the left where the shot had come from. There, outlined against the moon, a black hooded figure aboard a completely black horse fired again. A bullet plowed into the ground in front of Rio's horse. Then another. Clayton, realizing what was happening, slowed his horse, looking back at his companion. The shrouded figure on the rim fired again. A lead pellet drilled the earth in front of Jack's horse. He jerked the stallion back, and another slug kicked up the dirt where the steed had just been standing a moment ago. He quickly wheeled the big stallion, churning the sod in a furious scramble, and headed back toward the wounded Rio. The rifle barked again and again as Jack raced alongside of Rio, reaching for his reins. "Hang on," he shouted as he plucked the reins from Pierce's grasp and pulled his horse around to lead him off at a gallop. Rio swayed in the saddle, hanging onto the saddle horn with both hands as he had already dropped his gun somewhere in the grass. They could hear the rifle still booming behind them as they rode at a furious pace away from the gap, speeding out of range. They kept on going. At the opposite end of the gap, rolling at top speed in the other direction, the colonel's team and wagon sped on into the darkness, heading for home and safety. The dark rider on the rim turned and rode into the moonlit horizon and was swallowed up by the darkness of shadow. "That blasted dark rider," Ben Colby fumed, pacing back and forth in the Glory Hill mine office late that night. "I thought we had put him out of business." "Reagan," he shouted, "how could you let this happen? You're supposed to be so good. What happened?" Jack shrugged non-committally. Rio interjected. "It wasn't his fault. You should have seen him go after them before that dark rider fella ambushed us. Besides, he saved my life." "So," Colby boomed, turning on Pierce savagely, "now you're bosom buddies all of a sudden." "I don't suppose you have any idea who this dark rider is," Jack said calmly, changing the direction of the discourse and trying to cool Colby down. "If only I did," Colby growled, burying his right fist into the palm of his left hand. "Seems to me we need to prioritize things here," Jack said, taking control. "We need to get the boys patched up and then get this dark rider out of the way. If we have an opportunity to get rid of the Gordon girl in the meantime, fine. Otherwise, we get rid of the dark rider before he can get in the way again. The girl's already been put in danger twice. Right now, she may still think she was caught in circumstances. Too many attempts and she's likely to realize, and the hair of two for that matter, that she's the real target. And that might just lead straight back to you. Mr. Colby, we don't want that." Then he added, "Do we?" Colby grimaced, paced some more, then swung back to Clayton. "You're right," he agreed with a sigh of resignation. "You'd better get the boys into town and get them fixed up by the dock. Tell Dooley that the raiders hit us tonight, and the boys got hit. I'll tell him I drove them off. That way it will look like I'm doing something." "Good idea. You might even blame it on the dark rider while you're at it." Chapter 11. Encounter at Glory Hill. The grass was still wet from the early morning dew and glistened in the rays of the rising sun. The chill of night was quickly dissipating, and a low ground fog arose around the Pinto's jogging hooves as the warming sun steamed the moisture off the leaves of grass. Tamara Wild had risen early, and now astride the Pinto, clad in divided riding skirt, blue blouse and brown vest, riding boots, and a flat-crowned Western-style hat that covered her red hair and was tied tightly in place with a chin strap, set off for the Glory Hill mine, following the directions that Colonel Montrose had so graciously provided. She had spent a most pleasant night at the Colonel's home. He and his wife had risen early to provide the girl a hearty breakfast, although they tried to discourage her from riding off alone, especially after the attack the night before. She insisted that the attack could not have had anything to do with her, but it must have been the Colonel the attackers were after, and he should be the one to be careful. She told him that she should be in good hands when she got to the mine. She was sure she would be safe with Ben Colby. Besides, she was anxious to see the mine and examine the books, so she could see for herself what the financial situation was. It was mid-morning when Tamara arrived at the mine site. It was already a beehive of activity with a full crew of mine labor on the job, as Tamara rode into the valley and guided her horse to the hitch rail in front of the mine office. She could see Colby through the front glass window sitting with his back to her at his cluttered roll-top desk that was propped up against the back wall. She knew he couldn't see her as she stepped down from the Pinto and spun the reins casually over the hitch rail bar. Colby was preoccupied with some papers he was intently studying and didn't turn around right away when the door creaked open and Tamara's boot heels tapped across the wood floor. She halted behind him to the left, glimpsing over his shoulder. He was pondering over a handwritten letter, but the imprinted letterhead looked official. She shifted her weight, and the plank flooring creaked beneath her feet. Suddenly, startled, Colby swung around sharply in his swivel chair, clasping the note to his breast with both hands. "Oh," he grunted. "Miss Gordon, I didn't hear you come in." Then, realizing his reaction with the note, he flipped it face down on the desk and slid some papers over it nonchalantly. "This is a pleasant surprise. I must say, you certainly are an early riser." "You know what they say," she beamed a broad smile. "Early bird gets the worm, but thought gets the snake." "Yes," his voice lowered and his eyes darkened, though he tried to hide his chagrin. "I didn't expect you out so soon. I'm afraid I haven't gotten the files and records ready for you, yet." "That's all right," she retorted. "I've got all day. I'll just look around the mine until you can get to it." "Oh, no, you can't," he stammered. Then, gaining control, it's not safe to be wandering about the area alone. I'll be glad to show you around later. I am very busy, but I suppose I can take time to get those records for you." "Well, if you're sure, it's not too inconvenient." "No, not at all," he said, rising from his chair, striding across the room, and knelt in a corner in front of a heavy steel safe. He twirled the combination lock, it clicked, and he twisted the iron handle and opened it. He extracted a bound ledger and placed it on top of the safe. Then, standing and turning to a row of file cabinets along the adjacent wall, he opened a drawer and selected several file folders. He stacked these on top of the ledger book and carried the whole pile of records to a small workbench on the other side of the room near the front window. "You can work here, Miss Gordon," he said pleasantly, sliding a wooden straight-back chair in place for her. "Thank you very much, Mr. Colby," she trilled. "Dizzy dame," Colby thought to himself. "No trouble," he said. "Now if you will excuse me, I have some other paperwork to attend to." He scurried back to his desk and sat hunched over as he pondered over the papers strewn on his desk. After a few minutes, the girl said, "Mr. Colby?" "Yes," he grunted, not interrupting his thought. "These are really pretty numbers," she said. "I like the color scheme." "Huh? Colors?" He swiveled his chair around. "I really like the black and the reds." Dizzy dame, he thought again. Well, at least she wouldn't know what she was looking for anyhow. "I'm glad," he muttered, feeling a little relief that this woman may not be such a threat after all. Then, as he looked past her and out the front windows, his eyes darkened as his brows drew together with consternation. Out there, riding into the valley, he could see Tom Reagan and his big red stallion entering the valley. He was riding in alone. The other men were not with him. "Excuse me, Miss Gordon," he said brusquely. "There's something I need to attend to outside. I'll be back shortly." Quickly, he returned to his papers, scooped them up, and stuffed them into the safe. He slid the iron lever in place to latch the door and gave the dial a spin, making sure it was locked. He did not like leaving the girl alone in here, but he wanted to intercept Reagan and find out what had happened to the others without the girl around to hear anything. Satisfied that he left nothing incriminating about, he left the girl to her own silly devices and left the office. Chapter 12. Action in town. It was almost mid-morning when the tall man in the black broadcloth suit rapped on the door of Arnold Daggett's door. He waited impatiently for a moment and rapped again before noticing the placard in the window that said, "Gone to lunch." The man cursed to himself. Lunch at mid-morning? Probably drinking was more like it. He looked down the street, checking possible places the lawyer could have gone. He was still looking about when a thin, wizened old man passed by, saying, If you're looking for Daggett, I just saw him in the Red Bull Saloon a minute ago. Thanks, old-timer, Tom Reagan said, tipping the battered black Stetson he had taken from one of the three men who had held him captive briefly before he had overpowered them and made his escape, leaving their bodies lying dead on the trail. He strode quickly across the street and past the undertaker's funeral parlor. A buckboard and team was parked outside. Two rangy saddled horses were tied behind, and a skinny young man in raggedy overalls and suspenders was in the wagon bed sliding a pine box coffin toward the front of the wagon. His long blonde hair fell over his eyes and dirty face as he labored. Another disheveled youth had just helped load the box, turned from the wagon, and disappeared into the open door of the parlor. It was still early in the day, and the saloon was not yet busy when Reagan pushed his way through the batwing doors, paused a moment to let his eyes adjust to the dimness as compared to the bright sunlight outside. He glanced around slowly and saw there were only a few patrons at tables and two men standing at the bar. Reagan quickly stepped up to the bar and said to the bartender, "I'm looking for Arnold Daggett." His voice carried. "I'm Arnold Daggett," the runty lawyer hunched over the bar at the far end said, pulling himself erect and striding toward Reagan. "What can I do for you?" As Daggett came close, Reagan said in a subdued tone, "I'm Tom Reagan. I was told to check in with you." "R. Reagan?" Daggett stammered. I'm afraid that's impossible." "Why, you can't be. I mean, you're already here." "I mean, why? You're not him." "Will you stop your yammering?" Reagan said with annoyance. "What are you trying to say?" "A man calling himself Tom Reagan came to town yesterday. Say, what goes on here anyways?" "That man's an imposter," Reagan raged. "His name is Jack Clayton. He's a government agent." How do I know you are not the imposter?" Daggett was still flustered. Reagan grasped the runt by the front of his collar and lifted him to his toes. He pushed his flushed face close to his. "Because I'm telling you," he boomed. The other patrons jerked around to gape at the altercation. "Why, yes, sir," Daggett mumbled compliantly. Slowly, Reagan let the lawyer down and released him with chagrin as he realized he had caused a scene. He looked around the room, noting the eyes on him. Then, with a start, he saw Francie Jones. Although his back was to her, he plainly saw her reflection in the long mirror behind the bar. She had been coming down the stairway and had stopped short halfway down the stairs when she recognized Tom Reagan. Hoping she had not been seen, she lifted the skirts of her blue gingham traveling gown, whirled, and climbed quickly back up the stairs. Watching her go, Reagan smiled thinly to himself. "And she's with him," he growled. He pushed the lawyer roughly aside and ran across the room and up the stairs after her. "I'm really sorry, Mr. Tate, Evan Huntley," the undertaker said nervously for the umpteenth time. "Oh, shut up," the gristled Josh Tate growled. "Ain't nobody sorry, and neither are you. None of you highfalutin town folks ever cared a lick about the likes of us Tates." Josh Tate was just as disheveled and dirty as his two remaining sons. Obviously, none of them had had a bath for quite some time, much less had they changed their clothes for quite a spell. His dark eyes peered out from his grimy, bony face from under the ragged and limp, wide-brimmed farmer's hat that covered his long, greasy black hair. His sons Toot and Claude had just come through the door to retrieve the second coffin. "But somebody's sure gonna be sorry before me and my boys are through with him," Josh Tate growled. "What did you say that varmint's name was?" "Well, I'm not sure, but I heard it said his name was Reagan," Huntley stammered, as if he didn't know but knew full well what it was. "Yes, that's it," he added. "I believe it was. Tom Reagan, I heard it said. Fancy dressed stranger, came into town yesterday, shot your boys down right out there in the street. We all saw it." He didn't dare add that the two dead Tate boys had started the fight. Sorry to hear about the attack on you last night. I sure wish I had anticipated that and been there to help, Sheriff Mort Dooley said. He was sitting behind his desk in the sheriff's office. Colonel Montrose sat in a straight-back chair across from him, leaning his goateed chin against the handle of his ornate cane. There is no way you could have known, Mort. It wasn't your fault, the colonel said glumly. I must say, I am confused, though. I just don't know whose side this Dark Rider is on, but I'm glad he was there for us last night. Funny, Mort answered. Tom told me it was the Dark Rider that attacked you. Tom Reagan? What about him? The colonel raised his gray head and sat erect. He was in earlier this morning, Dooley explained. The Dark Rider hit the Glory Hill last night, too. Shot up some of Colby's men. Tom brought them into the dock. He told me you had been hit, too. But how would he have known about that? I haven't told anyone but you. Just now. Mort sat up straight and tilted his head back. His old eyes widened, then his wrinkled brow pushed them to slits. He pursed his lips, seething with anger. Unless... He pushed his chair back and jumped to his feet. Come on, let's see if this Mr. Reagan is still in town. He's got some tall explaining to do. Francie was feverishly turning the key to her room when Reagan caught up to her. He barreled into her, pushing her face forward into the door, pinning her tight so she could not move even as she tried to struggle and reach for the pistol in her purse. You little hellion, he growled, a tinge of a chuckle in his voice. I've got a special score to settle with you and your boyfriend. Go ahead, big man, Francie oathed, her cheek planted solidly against the door panel and slurring her words. Jack will kill you. Reagan laughed. Not this time, sister. Your boyfriend has just run out of luck. Daggett had just sprinted down the hall and came to a halt behind Reagan. What's going on here? He demanded meekly. Never mind. Just do as I tell you. Where's that G-man now? Out at the mine with Colby. All right then. We'll take her with us. Can you get us some horses or a rig? I've got a rig at the livery. Daggett answered. Go get it and bring it around. Daggett seemed immobile as he tried to process what was happening. Now, move, Reagan roared. Daggett suddenly came aware and scurried off like a fleeing rat. Toot and Claude Tate was just lifting the pine coffin into the rear of the wagon bed when Sheriff Mort Dooley and Colonel Montrose stepped out of the sheriff's office and into the street. Farther down the street, they saw Arnold Daggett pull up in front of the Red Bull. A man and a woman hurried though the saloon doorway and headed for the waiting rig. The man was dressed in a black suit, and Mort assumed it to be Tom Reagan. The woman was the same one he had seen get off the train with Tom the day before. Mort quickened his step and hurried forward, raising his arm to flag the man down. The colonel limped after as best he could with his cane. Tom, Dooley called urgently. Tom Reagan. The woman had just been seated in the center of the seat next to Daggett on his right, and the black-suited man was just starting to climb up when he heard the call. He stepped back and turned to face the oncoming sheriff. Dooley stopped abruptly, realizing his mistake. Oh, I'm sorry, mister, he said with surprise. The resemblance was extraordinary. I thought you were Tom Reagan. I am Tom Reagan, you old fool. Mort stared dumbfounded, speechless. The colonel came alongside, and they both watched the man climb to the wagon seat, barely seated when the team bolted forward, rolling the rig and passengers at a rapid clip down the dusty street. They didn't notice the two Tate boys had heard the name Reagan and looked at each other briefly before releasing the pine box and hurrying back inside the funeral parlor. Now what do you make of that, Mort? The colonel mused. I don't know, Dooley muttered. Just then, the Tates burst through the funeral parlor door and ran into the street, just in time to see Daggett's wagon disappearing in a cloud of dust at the edge of town. Toot and Josh pulled the horses loose from the back of their wagon, swung into the saddles, and thundered down the street after Daggett's rig. Claude ran down the street, found a horse tethered to a hitch rail, climbed into the saddle, and turned the stolen animal to follow his father and brother. "That doesn't look good either," Dooley cursed. "I don't know what's going on, but we'd better get after them all." Chapter 13. Shootout on the Trail. Daggett had whipped his team into a frenzy, and the rig bounced with every chuck-hole and slewed around every curve, the passengers leaning back and forth as the wagon rolled on. Reagan gripped Francie's arm tightly, and she could feel that he was bruising her, but she remained silent and restrained. With all of their attention on the road ahead, and with the clatter of the rig and noise of running hooves, leather and harness, they were not aware of the pursuing Tates, who were fast approaching behind them. It seemed to happen so fast that Reagan and Daggett hardly had time to react as Toot Tate rode past them and grabbed the left side horse's bridle to pull the team to a halt. Dust mushroomed into the air behind the sliding hoofs of Toot's mount. The rig jerked to a halt. Reagan, enraged at the sudden attack, released Francie's arm and stood up in the wagon box, drawing his pistol automatically, lining his sights and pulling the trigger. Flame belched from the muzzle. The team started to bolt at the sound of the thundering pistol shot. Toot's horse reared onto its hind legs, and the boy's bloody body pitched out of the saddle and landed in the dirt, his sightless eyes staring blankly into the sun. Reagan caught a movement out of the corner of his eye and twisted his body to the right, realizing another rider pulling up alongside the halted rig. Josh Tate, eyes blazing with hate, saw Toot go down. He brought his big pistol up to line it on Reagan. Their eyes met briefly as both men fired almost simultaneously. The roar of both guns blared as one. Reagan, a look of surprise on his face, fell backward from the wagon onto his back, a blue-black hole smoldering between his eyes. Josh Tate's horse thrashed about, the old man swaying back and forth in the saddle, blood spewing from his gaping chest and covering his dirty shirt. Then Tate's eyes closed, and he loosed his hold on the reins and slumped to the ground. Arnold Daggett, frightened out of his wits, whipped up the team once more and sent the wagon forward, sweat flowing down his terrified face. Francie, now free of Reagan and Daggett with both hands on the traces, saw her chance. She rolled to the side and fell off the wagon, skinning her elbows as she rolled onto the hard-packed earth. She watched Daggett disappear on down the road. He would get to Colby now and tell all he knew. Jack was going to be in big trouble now. Her immediate concern for Jack was now interrupted as she heard another horse approaching. She turned, half sitting, her hands still flat on the ground. Claude Tate was bringing his horse to a sliding halt before her, kicking dust into her eyes. The boy was practically in tears as he saw the bodies of his family before him. He pulled his pistol from his belt and waved it crazily in the air, wailing with an agonizing scream. Francie knew not what to expect. The boy was crazy. Then from behind came two more riders. The boy wheeled his horse and saw Mort Dooley and Colonel Montrose fast approaching. Without thought, without regard, the boy started shooting wildly at the oncoming riders, whipping his hose back and forth, churning the dust. He fired rapidly and haphazardly, total disregard for caution. The sheriff slid his horse to a halt and aimed his pistol carefully and deliberately. His finger tightened and the gun barked once. Claude Tate fell backward out of the saddle and lay still. Mort and the colonel rode forward, warily keeping their pistols ready until they had come close enough to see that all of the Tates were dead. Francie was now on her feet, brushing the dust off. The two riders drew to a halt in front of her. She could see the badge on Mort's vest. "What in the Sam Hill is going on here, miss?" Dooley demanded. And just who are you?" "Francie Jones," she stated flatly, as she moved toward Claude's horse and taking up the reins. "I'm with the government, working with the man you thought was Tom Reagan. That's the real Reagan." She pointed a thumb at the dead body. "He's in with the outlaws." "There's no time to explain further," she said, swinging into the saddle, bunching her skirt above her bare ankles as she settled her feet into the stirrups. "Clean up this mess and don't say anything to anybody. Wait here until I get back." She slid a Winchester from its scabbard that was fastened to the saddle rig. She wheeled the horse, reins in her left hand and the rifle held high in her right, drummed the horse's ribs with her heels, and speeded down the road after Daggett's wagon. Chapter 14. Ambush at the mine. "Where's the boys?" Colby demanded, walking out into the open area in front of the office building, almost forcing Jack to rein up short before reaching the hitch rail. Jack tried to ignore the big man's excitement and said nonchalantly, as he stepped down from the saddle, "The doc wanted them to stay and rest a while before getting back." "A while?" Colby boomed. "How long is a while?" "Until tomorrow, I suppose." "You suppose?" "Well, he didn't say for sure," Jack said. Colby pursed his lips and his face flushed. "We got a shipment coming in tonight. I at least need Rio." He blustered. "I can do anything you'd need Rio for." Jack half grinned. Colby thought a moment, then let out a breath. "Yeah, I guess you could at that," Colby admitted, then added, "There's a load of silver bullion coming in tonight. It's being shipped up here from Mexico. We don't tell them exactly where it's going until we inspect the shipment and look the crew over, so we meet them south of here and then bring it on in." "So you need me to go with you to meet them?" "Yes. If there is any trouble, I'll expect you to handle it." "Fine," then added, "Where do we meet them?" Colby drew his dark brows together and stared coldly into Jack's eyes. "You'll find out when we get there." Jack nodded, refusing to push the matter further. Colby still didn't trust him enough. They stared at each other, trying to read each other's faces. The silence between the two men was suddenly broken as the sound of a team and wagon came barreling into the valley amidst a cloud of dust. Arnold Daggett was standing crouched on the wagon box, lashing his whip against the tiring team's backs and shouting at them with urgency. The team came racing forward, headed straight for where Colby and Jack stood, without slowing. Terror filled the driver's eyes and he lashed the whip again. Jack and Colby stepped back abruptly, as if moving out of the way as the wagon came slewing to a sliding halt in front of them. Daggett standing erect now and hauling the reins back as far as he could to pull the lathered horses to a halt. The rig had not yet completely halted as a rifle shot echoed from high on the hill bordering the far side of the valley. A puff of powder smoke wafted up out of the tree-lined ridge. Daggett's body suddenly stiffened, and he stood erect, a surprised shock covering his face. Then he fell forward, pitching to the side of the wagon and rolling in the grass, a massive blotch of red blossoming across his back. The team started to bolt forward, but Jack leapt forward and grasped the bridle. Digging his heels into the dirt and sliding forward with the team for a few feet, he finally brought them under control, lashed the reins to the hitch rail, and sprinted toward Daggett's fallen body. Colby had already reached the lawyer and was kneeling down, cradling the man's head in his arms. Daggett was gasping his last breaths as Jack bent down. Daggett's eyes rolled upward toward Jack. He tried to speak. R, he croaked, eyes bulging, then slumped into death. Colby dropped the lawyer's head onto the ground and stood up, glaring at Jack. "Did he say anything?" Jack asked. "No, not really," Colby blurted, gazing to the hills where the shot had come from. "But I know it was that dark rider. I've had enough of him." Colby squeezed his hands shut in tight, massive fists. "He's got to be stopped." Jack followed the gaze to the top of the ridge. He saw nothing, The shooter was out of sight, or had gone. "I'll get him, Ben," Jack said with conviction, as he turned and strode toward his big red stallion. "Yeah, you do that," Colby growled. "Don't come back without him." Jack swung into the saddle, wheeled the red stallion, and sent him racing off across the valley and climbing the hill to the ridge. Ben Colby stood stock still, watching him go. Then, as the horse and rider disappeared over the ridge, Colby glanced around and saw that many of the mine workers were standing about curious as to what was happening. "You men have work to do. Stop gawking and get back on the job. This doesn't concern you. Got that?" He didn't wait to see their reaction. He just turned and stormed back inside the office building. As he slammed the door behind him, his rage grew even hotter, and his eyes blazed with hate as he stared at the girl he knew as Sue Gordon, kneeling in front of his safe with the door open and papers in her hand. She gasped with surprise, and her lashes flashed. She had been caught. "Now what do we have here, Miss Gordon?" He peeled his lips back over his teeth and growled. "Curiosity kills the cat. Or should I say little girls?" Chapter 15. Deadly Killer. It was past mid-afternoon when Jack Clayton rode back into the valley. Ben Colby had seen him coming and strode outside to meet him. He waited for several minutes, watching the procession before him. The man he knew as Tom Reagan rode the big red horse along the trail at a slow, steady walk, trailing reins behind him as a black stallion lumbered along to the rear. A black-garbed figure lay limply across the saddle, tied into place with a lariat. "You got him?" Colby shouted excitedly. "You actually got the Dark Rider?" "I sure did," Clayton said, pulling up close to Colby and starting to descend from the saddle. "It took a little doing, but I got him," he said smugly, striding toward the black and its burden. Jack lifted the Dark Rider's head and pulled the mask off, so Colby could see the face clearly. There was a blue-black hole between the man's eyes beneath his shock of thick black hair. Colby drew close and looked intently at the face. "Know him?" Jack asked curtly, already knowing the answer. "No," Ben said quietly, pondering. "Can't say that I have." He thought a moment. "Funny, I thought sure it would be someone I had seen before. Wonder what his game was." Then he addressed Jack deliberately. "You sure he's the Dark Rider?" "As sure as I'll ever be. I found where his horse had been milling about in the trees while he was waiting. Then I trailed him until I caught up with him. He tried to shoot it out with me. Big mistake," Jack gloated. "Well, that's one thorn out of our side," Colby said. "But I've got more bad news." Without waiting for response from Jack, he supplied. "I caught that fool Gordon girl breaking into my safe." "What?" Jack was genuinely surprised. He almost did not dare to ask the next question, but did. "What did you do with her?" He held his breath. "I wanted to kill the little wildcat," he said. "She put up one hell of a fight, but I managed to knock her out and tie her up. Figured I would wait until the workers left for the day before doing her in. Didn't want any more shots to pique their curiosities." Clayton felt relief, but did not show it. "That was probably a smart idea, boss," he said. Colby smiled with satisfaction. "We're going to need a good explanation for her death," Jack said. "Maybe we can use everything that's happened here to our advantage. I can say the Dark Rider shot both Daggett, which he did, and the girl just before I got him. That will put me in good with the sheriff and the miners, and they'll think I've gotten results for them." He chuckled. Seeing the humor, Ben Colby nodded in agreement. He grinned broadly. "You're a smart fellow," he beamed. "You'll do to ride the river with. Yes, indeed, I think you'll do." Then he added, "But there's no time today. I need you tonight, and there won't be time for you to take them into town and get back." "We can stash the bodies until later," Jack said. "What did you do with Daggett's body?" "I put it in the refinery and covered it over with a tarp." "Fine. We can stash the Dark Rider and the girl in there too. Maybe it might be a good idea to shut down work early today, Jack said. Good idea. You get rid of the Dark Rider's body while I go roust the men out. When I get back, you can go ahead and kill the girl. Colby grinned and slapped Jack on the shoulder with approval, then turned and strode away. Clayton had just emerged from the refinery after putting the body away. He could see the miners exiting the valley, another day of labor complete. Ben Colby was striding back toward the office. He saw Clayton and waved as if all was clear. Jack waved back in acknowledgement, then quickened his step and entered the office, leaving the door wide open. Colby came to an abrupt halt, startled with surprise at the blast of a single gunshot within the building. He ran forward with excitement. He hadn't expected Tom Reagan to be so sudden. The man was a killer. What a man! The acrid smell of gun smoke still filled the small room as Colby reached the doorway and stared at the scene before him. Tom Reagan was still smiling to himself with satisfaction. Smoke trailed from the muzzle of his pistol, hanging low in his outstretched hand over the girl's body, her blouse stained red. He turned, acknowledging Ben in the doorway. He smiled. That was nice, he almost whispered, and shoved his 6-gun back into its holster with a slap. Colby didn't know what to say. Reagan's brutal coldness sent chills up his spine. She's dead? Colby stammered. That she is, my friend, Jack said triumphantly. He stooped and lifted the girl from the floor and slung her body loosely over his shoulder. Colby stepped aside as the man he knew as Tom Reagan brushed past him and swaggered off toward the refinery with his trophy. Chapter 16. Foul Up. The sun was setting low when Sheriff Mort Dooley strode down the dusty street toward Doc Finch's house. It was a low one-story cottage with a white picket fence toward the edge of town. The doctor maintained both residence and office there. Mort stepped up onto the porch and rapped on the door. After a moment or two, the door opened and a short, squat man in his late 60s peered out at him through round pince-nez glasses. Hiya, Doc, Mort greeted. Understand, you have some of Ben Colby's men here for fixing up. Al's still here, Doc answered. Shot up too bad to ride. You just missed Rio and Shorty. The sheriff's jaw sank. He was dumbfounded. He had been instructed to arrest these men before they could return to Colby. He was too late. Rio and Shorty, feeling better and knowing that a shipment was due tonight, had decided they'd better get back to the mine. But first, they wanted to check in on Arnold Daggett, and that was what had brought them to the door of the attorney's office. As was their habit, they barged right on in without knocking. Instead of finding the weasel-looking lawyer behind his desk, they were surprised to see a woman dressed in rain shirt, men's blue jeans, and a pistol belt, going through file cabinets, her back to them, her uncovered blonde hair streaming down the back of her neck. She spun around, surprised at the sound of the opening door, and stared into the grinning faces of the two grimy men. So, what have we got here? Rio chided, moving forward quickly. Francie Jones grabbed for the pistol in the holster hanging on her right hip and had it halfway out when Rio reached her, grasping her wrist with his pained left and pinning her gun arm to her side. He slapped her face with the back of his right. She twisted her face back and spat at him. She struggled, but now Shorty had hold of her too. They pushed her back against the open file drawer. It slammed shut as she followed it back until she was held firmly against it. She felt the pistol being pulled from her grasp and heard it clatter to the wood floor with a thud. Rio's large, dirty hand covered her mouth, and his splayed, bony fingers squeezed her cheeks. Rio's dark eyes bore into hers, barely an inch away. The smell of his breath was putrid. Now just what are you doing here anyways? Who are you? And where's Daggett? Obviously, he really didn't want an answer right now, for he didn't remove his hand. She glared at him defiantly. Say, I remember now. I saw you at the Red Bull dealing cards. You know what? The boss is going to want to know about you. Mort Dooley, confounded as to what to do, had left the doc's house and hurried back down the street when he saw the riders ahead of him heading the other direction toward the other end of town. Even in the gathering dusk, he recognized Rio and Shorty. But there was a third rider between them. His heart seemed to skip a beat. He stood stock still in shock. The third rider was Francie Jones. Rio and Shorty, with Francie as their prisoner, pushed their mounts full speed out of town, heading for Colby's mine. The pounding hooves droned loudly in the early evening air and churned dust into a billowing cloud. They had gone about a mile when Rio, checking their back trail, saw the pursuing lone rider behind them. It was already too dark to recognize the rider, even if he had been closer. The urgency with which he rode told Rio that, whoever it was, he was probably in pursuit of the trio. Signaling to Shorty, Rio slowed the pace of his horse. Shorty looked back and knew at once that Rio was warning him of pursuit. He glanced back at Rio, looking for instructions. Rio motioned with his thumb up the trail toward a high rise strewn with large boulders and aspen trees. Shorty nodded, and the riders turned their mounts off the trail to climb the steep incline, trailing the reins of Francie's horse as they went. The horse's hooves slid against the loose dirt and rocks along the bank. They had to really dig in to make the grade. Francie grasped tightly to the saddle horn and swayed violently back and forth as they finally made their way to the top of a ridge and pulled to a halt behind a large boulder. Rio and Shorty quickly dismounted, pulling rifles from their saddle scabbards as they stepped down. Rio grasped Francie's arm and pulled her from the saddle, letting her fall into the rock-hard dirt. She rolled over and tried to rise, only to find Rio standing over her, the muzzle of his Winchester scant inches from her face. Her eyes flashed and she clenched her jaw. "Don't make a sound," Rio growled. "Get up and move in close to that rock." He motioned toward the big boulder. "Shorty, move those horses back and tie them in the brush. Then come on back." Francie was rising to her feet now as Rio stepped back and gave her room. She pushed a shock of blonde hair back out of her eyes as she struggled sullenly to her feet. Rio stepped behind her and gave her a shove. She slammed face forward against the face of the boulder. Rio followed close and pinned her in place, craning his neck to see over the rock. The rider was fast approaching along the trail. In just moments, he would be coming close and could pass by the ambush spot. Shorty came running up from behind, bending low so as to not be seen over the rock. "Hold her and cover her mouth," Rio ordered. Francie felt the transfer of power and tried to struggle, but all was for naught. The two men were too powerful for her, and Shorty now held her tight, his burly hand covering her mouth. She tried to bite it, but only gagged. Shorty banged her head against the stone. Her brain went cloudy, and nauseous dizziness took control of her, and she sank into unconsciousness. Rio, now lying prone against the top of the boulder, with his rifle firmly braced against the rock, gazed along the trail. The rider was close enough to identify now. It was Sheriff Mort Dooley. For some reason, Dooley was in pursuit of them, but Rio did not know why, nor did he really care. The fact was, the lawman was on his trail, and he had to kill him. Closer and closer Dooley rode. The rifle sight settled on the wiry frame of the old man. Closer, closer. Now he was passing just below Rio's position. Now he was just past, his back creating a clear target. The rifle sight lined between the lawman's shoulders. A clear and near shot. Rio's trigger finger tightened. The slack was taken up, and then with a little more squeeze, the Winchester bellowed one single time. its echo screeching across the open expanse to and back from the far crimson sun-setting horizon. Mort Dooley's arms flung high in the air, and he pitched backward from the saddle to land heavily onto the shadow-darkened trail. His riderless horse loped on down the trail. All went silent. Mort Dooley moved no more. Chapter 17. Rendivis. The clear night sky still held a tinge of gray. A quarter moon and an array of stars lent slight visibility along the shadowy trail into Paiute Pass. Jack Clayton, as Tom Reagan, Ben Colby, and two of his henchmen had been riding steadily for the last hour following the setting sun until it completely disappeared behind the horizon. Colby, true to his word, had never mentioned their destination until they entered the pass. "This is Paiute Pass," he said, as they angled their mounts between the low-lying hills that lined the pass on each side. "We should meet up with the shipment soon." Then, as they rounded a bend, he added with a trace of excitement in his voice, "Looks like that's it up ahead." Peering ahead into the shadows, Clayton could see the bulky shape of a wagon and team heading toward them. As the two advancing parties approached each other, Jack could see the driver on the box and two accompanying outriders on each side of the wagon. "Hello, the wagon," Colby waved. The driver pulled back on the reins, drawing the team to a halt. The two riders advanced forward slowly. The rider on the left cast a bulky shadow, his face in shadow. The other man was slimmer. "You, Colby?" the bulky shadow asked. His voice was deep and disturbingly familiar to Clayton. The hackles on the back of Jack's neck stood up and prickled. "That's right," Colby answered, as he and Clayton halted their horses, sitting face to face with the riders. Jack's fears were soon realized when the bulky man said, "I'm Ace Murdoch. We got business?" "If you got what I want, we have." Then to Jack, "Tom, check the wagon." Refraining from answering, Jack swung his horse to the left and rode around the slimmer rider and came up behind the wagon. So far, it was dark enough that Murdoch could not see his face. If he could just keep his face shadowed and not let his voice be heard, he might be able to play his hand a while longer. If not, all would be lost, and he would probably have to shoot it out here with the odds stacked against him. He pulled up to the wagon, dismounted, and lifted the tarp. Holding the tarp above his head so his face would not be seen, he struck a match to inspect the contents. In the flickering light of the match, the silvery shine of minted bars reflected. They had a Mexican stamp. These were the bars that Jack himself had smuggled across the Arizona border. He had come full circle now and had ridden the full length of the pipeline. He blew out the match, replaced the tarp, and remounted. He rode close to Colby and said in a low voice, hoping it would not carry to Murdoch. "Okay, then let's roll," Colby ordered, wheeling his horse to the side. The driver whipped up the team and started forward. Colby waved to his two men to advance to the rear of the wagon and follow. He and Clayton spurred their mounts forward to lead on back to the Glory Hill mine. The procession followed the darkened trail. Minutes passed by quickly. Jack knew that once they were back at the mine, there would be lamplight, and it would become increasingly more difficult to conceal his face from Murdoch. He had to play this hand out. Take what comes and hope for the best. The trip out to meet the wagon seemed longer than the trip back, partially because he knew where he was going, and mostly because he dreaded time running out. He could already see the valley up ahead. They were almost back to the Glory Hill. "We'll unload at the refinery," Colby said as they approached the valley. "We'll need to melt the bars and re-stamp them as ours." Jack said nothing. "We do that with the silver we steal from the other miners too. When we start shipping silver to the mint, we'll have a corner on the market." "Smart," Jack acknowledged, keeping his remarks short and low. They rolled into the valley and approached the refinery. Clayton could see the figure of a guard rushing forward on foot to meet them. He carried his rifle high at the ready. Colby waved to him, and he rushed to the big double doors of the refinery and pulled them open. He then disappeared inside the building, and in a moment, flickering lanterns were lighted inside. Their beaming lights spilled outside to light up the driveway. Colby and Clayton halted their horses and wheeled them back to face the trailing wagon. Jack could see Murdoch's face in the glow now. Jack kept his head down, trying to shadow his face with the brim of his hat. "Have your driver back the wagon in so we can unload," Colby shouted to Murdoch. Murdoch turned to his men and gave the orders. Clayton and Colby pulled their mounts back out of the way, rode toward the hitch rail at the side of the building, and dismounted. Chapter 18. Discovery. In a matter of minutes, the driver had positioned the wagon and had it backed into the open area of the refinery. He set the brake and tied off the reins. The team blew, stamped uneasily at the restraint, and snorted. "All right, let's get this thing unloaded," Colby ordered, and led the way into the refinery. Murdoch and the other men followed. Clayton held back to the rear of the group. He glanced up at the driver and saw he was still sitting on the box, making no effort to move. That meant that if something happened inside the refinery, the driver would be behind him, making escape more difficult. Jack moved toward the end of the wagon bed, but still remained a little alongside, refraining from stepping into the better lighted open area. Two men threw back the tarp, revealing the silver to the lantern light. Colby smiled broadly, his eyes gleaming. "What do you think?" Murdoch asked with a gloat. "Beautiful," Colby murmured. "Just beautiful." The two men started pulling the silver bars from the bed, handing them to the other men as they each in turn took a bar and stacked it against a side wall before returning to the wagon for another. The work was well underway when Colby glanced at Jack. "What are you standing over there for, Reagan? Come on over and get a good look at this stuff." "Reagan!" Murdoch jerked his head up. "Tom Reagan? Is that you?" Jack nodded with a grunt, keeping his head low. "I didn't recognize you in the dark. Why didn't you say something?" Murdoch started toward him, grinning. Suddenly, the grin faded, and Murdoch came to an abrupt halt. "What the? You're not Reagan?" Colby jerked erect with excitement. "What?" "He's right," Jack said, stepping forward, his gun held tightly in his right hand and pointed directly at Murdoch. "I'm not." He lifted his head, his face revealed in the lantern light, his slate blue eyes glaring with menace. The hammer of his pistol eared back with a loud click. "Now, all of you, get your hands up." Clayton pushed Murdoch back against Colby. "You men," he waved the pistol barrel at the men who were unloading. "Get over there with your bosses," then added with a booming voice, "Now!" The men slowly bunched together. "Clayton," Murdoch growled, "I should have known we didn't get rid of you. I knew we needed to see a body." "What are you talking about?" Colby demanded. "This is Jack Clayton, a government man. But unlike Tom Reagan, he's working against us, not with us," Murdoch explained. "What about Reagan?" Colby flustered with confusion. "Yeah, how about that Clayton? What happened to Reagan?" Murdoch asked. "You don't need to know," Jack answered. "Besides, you're in no position to be asking questions anyhow. Now, one by one, I want each one of you to carefully lift your weapons and drop them to the ground. One slight mishap, and I'll shoot you graveyard dead." "That's what you think, Mr. G-Man?" Murdoch smiled triumphantly. Clayton's eyes darkened with realization as he felt cold steel press against his spine. He grimaced and let his pistol hang loose on his trigger finger in defeat. He sighed. "Guess you forgot about my driver, Clayton." Murdoch chided as the driver reached around Jack's body to relieve him of his 6-gun. The driver pushed him forward. Colby, Murdoch, and the other men crowded close around him. I don't know what's going on here, Colby growled. But you've made one bad mistake, coming here and making a fool out me. No one can make a fool out of you, Colby. The voice was hard and cold, but definitely feminine. You were born a fool, Tamara Wilde said, emerging from the shadows beside the wagon. She moved slowly and steadily forward, a six-gun lined on the outlaws, beating directly at Colby's forehead. Colby stared at her red-stained blouse. Now get your hands back up and move back away from Jack. Then to Jack, here. She tossed him a pistol she had taken from Tom Reagan's body while the men were gone. Jack caught it and stepped back to one side. Well, well, Miss Gordon, it seems my friend didn't shoot you after all, but you sure ruined that pretty blouse, Colby sneered. Red ink from my ledgers, I presume? I should have guessed it. I should have known the two of you were working together. Not quite together, but same objective, Tamara answered. Very clever, Miss Gordon. You are wrong there, Colby. I'm a Pinkerton detective, not Sue Gordon. The real Sue Gordon was suspicious of her uncle's death. She hired the Pinkertons to investigate you. So I came in her place. Now, Jack said, waving his pistol, let's start all over. Where were we now? Oh yes. He eared back the hammer. Once again, let's get rid of that hardware. You first, Colby. Colby lowered his hand toward his holstered six-shooter. Jack warned. Use your left and only two fingers. Lift it out real careful like. Colby glared out from under dark, belligerent eyes. His fingers touched the pistol butt, but he stopped short and didn't grasp it. A hint of smile returned to his face. I don't think so. Colby pulled his hand to the side. It's my turn again, he said with a choked chuckle. He looked past Clayton and Tamara. Just in time, Rio, Colby raised his voice. Nice try, Colby, Jack said, trying to hide any hint of fear, hoping Colby was bluffing. Won't work. I had the sheriff arrest your boys this afternoon. Then I guess the good sheriff didn't do his job. Rio's voice behind Jack's back sent chills down his spine. Got himself killed, though, Rio laughed. Now if you two will just drop your guns, Colby said gleefully, drawing his own. This is getting monotonous, Jack said, and dropped the pistol to the floor. He glanced at Tamara and nodded. Her eyes flashed, but she followed suit and dropped the weapon. Look what else we have here for you, boss, Rio said, as Shorty pushed Francie forward into the circle of light. I don't know who she is, but I'm sure she's working with these two. We caught her in Daggett's office. Then to Clayton, my, you sure do have a lot women. Daggett's office? Colby retorted. What gives, anyway? First, the Dark Rider kills Daggett, and then... Daggett killed? Rio was surprised. When? How? How do you know the Dark Rider did it? We saw him do it. Then this. Colby gestured toward Jack. Imposter killed the Dark Rider. His bushy brows pulled together. Maybe not, though, Colby muttered thoughtfully. But he did bring his body in. It's right over here with Daggett's body. He stepped to the wall and lifted a tarp that covered the bodies. See? Ace Murdoch's big jaw dropped. Reagan, he said with disbelief. That's Tom Reagan. The real one. Rage surged through Colby's bulky body. Arg! He groaned as he swung on Jack, arcing his pistol to crash into Clayton's skull. Jack fell back before the blow came, minimizing its impact, but still crumpled dizzily to the floor. He rolled over just as Colby's boot caught him in the side, landing a solid blow. Air gushed from Clayton's lungs. You dirty liar, you! His right foot was raised to stomp the G-Man once more, his rage almost out of control, but he refrained from completing the kick as gunfire erupted outside in the valley. He regained his balance and shouted to Rio, "Get out there and see what's happening." He shoved Rio forward, and Rio sprinted toward the entrance. As he passed by Shorty, whose attention was momentarily diverted, Francie twisted violently, throwing him off balance and stamped on his toe. He loosened his grip and Francie pushed him directly at the distracted Colby. They fell back into the other men, and Francie dove beneath the wagon. Clayton, following her lead, rolled backward under the wagon, grasping a fallen pistol off the floor as he went. He rolled onto his back as Colby, Shorty, and the others regained their footing. Colby squeezed off a shot. Hot lead bore into the wooden floor next to Clayton's head, spewing splinters into his cheek. Jack, still flat on his back, raised his pistol and fired twice across chest into the melee, unable to aim. Shorty's back arched as he took a bullet. His arms flew skyward, his gun falling from his fingers, and he pitched face forward on the floor. Colby and the others jumped back, dodging for cover. Jack fired twice more, and then rolled to the other side of the wagon and came face to face with Tamara, who had taken advantage of the diversion and sought cover on this side of the wagon also. "We have to quit meeting like this," Jack wheezed. Chapter 19. Showdown. A hail of bullets pounded the wall over their heads and into the wall behind them. Jack pushed Tamara down hard, then rose and threw 2 more shots over the wagon at the outlaws. He ducked down, pulling cartridges from his belt, hoping his returned fire would keep his adversaries down while he shoved them into the 6-gun cylinder. Firing still raged outside in the valley. Rio came running back into the refinery, making his way alongside the wagon that was now rocking back and forth as the terrified team fought against their traces and the braked wheels. "Riders shooting it out with the guards," he shouted, unaware of what had happened during his absence. As he came rushing through, Francie swiveled onto her side and slid her booted foot out from under the wagon and caught his running step. He pitched forward onto his face, the surprise so sudden he could not comprehend what had happened. His pistol fell from his hand and slid across the wooden floor. Francie dived after it, rolling out from under the wagon, reaching for the weapon. Lead poured into the floor around her hand as her fingers gripped the handle. She rolled to her side, bringing the pistol up, firing in rapid succession. Clayton was also returning fire. 2 men fell. Colby, Murdoch, and the remaining man pulled back from their hiding places behind a stack of crates. Francie fired, and 1 man went down before reaching cover. She poured 2 more shots into the crate Colby was behind, just to keep him down. She twisted around, knowing Rio was still a threat, but she was too late. The dirty, swarthy pig of a man was all over her, pulling her around and slamming her back against the floor, pounding her gun hand against the wooden flooring, trying to force her to release her hold on the pistol. Clayton heard her scream. Sending Tamara at a run outside the refinery ahead of him, he raced to the front of the team, stepped on the hub of the wagon wheel, and lifted himself high enough to release the brake. The frightened team bolted forward. Jack fell from the hub, landing on his side as the wagon sped past him, leaving the refinery area wide open and clear. "Rio!" Clayton shouted, rising to 1 knee, aiming his 6-gun. Rio, still holding Francie down, raised his head and turned to look back. The last thing he saw was the G-man's cold, hard eyes and the blossoming flame from the Colt's muzzle. His body flipped sideways off of Francie, his terror-filled face twisted in death, a blue-black hole between his eyes. Colby and Murdoch had taken advantage of the temporary attention on Rio and ran for the back door of the refinery. They were just disappearing through the open door when Clayton spotted them. He pushed himself to his feet and ran after them, cramming shells into his gun as he ran. He paused just inside and to the right of the door, peered out into the darkness. Looking for signs of ambush, he leaped through the doorway, pistol ready, and landed on the grassy area between the refinery and the stamp mill. He looked to his right. There was a connecting gate. No way for them to get through there. He looked to his left. The valley was out there, and there were riders with flaming guns. It would be futile for Colby and Murdoch to run that way. That left the only way out, straight ahead into the darkened stamp mill. He moved to the closed door, stood to the side, and reached out to try it. It was unlatched. He was sure they were in there now. With a quick reach, he flung the door wide open. There were no gunshots, no sound from his quarry. They were waiting him out, waiting to see his silhouette framed against the outdoor light as he would come through the doorway. Bending low, Jack dived, hurling himself across the threshold and landing onto the earthen floor of the stamp mill. Flame belched from 6 guns and bullets pounded the wall over Clayton's head. Jack rolled as he landed, coming up momentarily to return fire twice at the muzzle flashes. Then he rolled to the right twice and back to the left a half turn. He lay there, holding his breath, waiting, listening. Silence, complete silence. He let moments tick away. He waited. Nothing. Dare he move? If he hadn't gotten them, and he was sure he hadn't, they were at a standoff. Someone would have to make the first move. Clayton decided he would have to make it. He reached into his cartridge belt and retrieved a bullet. He let it fly across the room to his left, and it clattered against something he couldn't see. Again, no return fire, no sound. Sweat beaded on Jack's forehead. He knew they had to be up to something. Or had they gotten away? Was there another way out? Then, with a deafening roar, the stamp mill came to life, the stamping die pounding in its shaft. Clayton's attention seized on this momentarily, just long enough for a lantern to emerge from behind a partition, bathing him in its ominous glow. A pistol shot rang out from the other side of the mill. Clayton felt a burning slug across the top of his left shoulder as he pitched sideways, rolling into the shadows behind a pile of silver bullion bars, returning fire as he went. The lantern retracted behind the partition, all went black again. Jack poured lead to the left of where he saw the lantern disappear. He heard a cry of pain, and then the lantern rolled out into view, its glass globe broken and flame igniting the area around it. Flame quickly leaped into a monstrous fire, lighting the stamp mill brighter than day. Clayton could see Ace Murdoch's body stretched out on the floor where he had fallen out from behind the partition. Jack saw Colby on the other side of the mill taking aim at him. He ducked low just in time. Bullets spanged off the silver bars. Enraged by the futility of it all, Colby threw all caution to the wind and sprang from his hiding place to run toward the door. Jack raised up from cover, saw Colby running, his back toward him. "Colby!" Jack shouted, lining his pistol at the outlaw's back. "Stop! I don't want to have to kill you." Colby whirled. "Too bad, G-Man." He fired point blank at Clayton. Jack squeezed his trigger at the same time. The thunder of the gunfire melted into the roar of the flames and the pounding stamp machine. Meanwhile, a horde of riders came to a sliding halt in the lantern-lit yard of the refinery doorway. The firing in the valley had ceased. Tamara ran up the gray-haired leader. Colonel Montrose was replete with all his glory, as he had once again had the chance to lead battle. The others were quickly dismounting and pouring into the refinery. One man had run up to Francie and was helping her to her feet. "Jack is back there in the stamp mill," she shouted, running to the rear entrance. She reached it just in time to see the mill light up from the flames inside. She started forward, but was pulled back. The colonel and his men and Tamara were right behind her. "It's too late," the colonel said. They stood there, frozen in the heat of flame. No, it couldn't be happening. The fire was through the roof now. Rafters were peeking through the flame, and then a whole buttress collapsed into the center of the burning building. Just as a shadowed figure outlined against the flame seemed to fly through the crumbling doorway and land at their feet just as the entire building crashed with a massive roar. Jack Clayton pushed himself to a half-sitting position on the ground and looked up at his astonished audience. "Some people really burn me up," he said glibly, running his fingers through his matted dark hair. Chapter 20. Aftermath. It was mid-morning, and sunlight streamed through the lace-curtained windows of Colonel Montrose's spare bedroom. The Colonel, Jack Clayton, Francie Jones, and Tamara Wilde were gathered around the bed. Mort Dooley was propped up on several pillows. The swath of bandages around his upper torso showed through the open neck of the borrowed nightshirt. His drawn face seemed more pinched than usual, but the old lawman was in good humor, and there was a glint in his eye. Lucky thing for me that Rio Polecat was a lousy shot. He moved a little in the bed and winced. Stupid fool should have checked to make sure I was dead instead of just a shoulder wound. Lucky for all of us, Jack said. We owe you a great deal, Mort. Aw, shucks, I didn't do nothing but get shot, fall off my horse, and lay there until the Colonel and the other miners came along. Just why were you there, Colonel? Tamara asked. We were supposed to meet Mort on the trail anyways, but a little farther along. I had been with him most of the afternoon and had gone to get the other miners while Mort went to arrest Rio and the others. The Colonel explained. I guess I just don't understand, Tamara said. I'm supposed to be the detective here, and I haven't got a clue as to what happened. It seems like I was just there in the middle of it all. What was this Dark Rider thing all about, and what happened with Daggett? Francie grinned. When the Tates attacked us on the trail, the real Tom Reagan was killed and Daggett got away. Knowing he would go straight to Colby and blow Jack's cover, I went after him. I shot him from the hill above the mine. You shot him? Tamara was puzzled. I thought the Dark Rider shot him. Jack chuckled. The Dark Rider did shoot him? He nodded toward Francie. You, the Dark Rider? An incredulous look on Tamara's face. Then it was you who stopped the attack on the Colonel and me the other night. That's right, Jack said. As the Dark Rider, her job was to watch my back. Rio and I were the ones who attacked you. What? Tamara gasped. Yes, I was supposed to kill you. I needed to fail. I had passed a note to Francie at the gaming tables to stay close to me that night. When she saw what we were up to, she took a hand and drove us off. He grinned at Francie. Supposedly, she didn't hurt Rio much, just enough to back us off. For some reason, she didn't hurt me at all. Next time, Buster, just give me a chance, she giggled. But the Dark Rider was around long before you two showed up. I saw you both get off the train together. Mort Dooley interjected. That's right, Francie said. I was here for weeks, but nobody saw me when I was not the Dark Rider. I hid out in a shack just south of town. The Black Stallion was stabled there. I was working with another partner then, another government man, Ramon Chavez, Mexican government that is. Both our countries were working on the smuggling of silver out of Mexico into the U.S. We had a run-in with Colby and his men, and though I was able to rescue him, Ramon died of his wounds. My boss recalled me, and I went back east to be teamed up with Jack. Jack had been reported killed, and we dreamed up this scheme to replace Tom Reagan. Meanwhile, back here, Colby decided to take advantage of the Dark Rider's lack of current activity and create his own Dark Rider to pin crimes on. So that's why I was so confused as to whose side the Dark Rider was on, Mort mused. One other thing I'm confused about, Tamara said to Jack. You brought in Tom Reagan's body dressed as the Dark Rider. Yes, Jack said. When Daggett was shot, I was pretty sure Francie had something to do with it. I rode up into the hills and found her waiting for me. We rode back to the spot where the Tates had ambushed Reagan. Francie had instructed Mort and the Colonel to hide the bodies and wait for her to return. I then briefly explained to Mort who I was and asked him to go back to town and arrest Colby's men. I instructed the Colonel to round up the other miners and meet Mort back in the same spot after dark. I wanted them to ride into the valley shooting and creating as much disturbance as possible. I didn't know for sure what kind of situation I would have gotten myself into by then, but I was sure I was going to need help. And you stashed me under a dirty old tarp with those smelly bodies, Tamara wrinkled her nose. Jack laughed. Would you rather I had actually shot you? She stuck her tongue out at him. Would have served you right, Jack cajoled. You shouldn't have let him catch you rifling his safe anyways. By the way, he added, did you find anything incriminating? She lowered her lashes and sighed dejectedly. No. Just a bunch of papers, all mining business. Too bad, Jack said. I wish I could have taken someone alive. Someone who could have told us about bigger fish. I know Reagan knew someone he referred to as boss. Then to Francie he said, what about Daggett's files? Did you find anything there? Well, I did find out who Ed Gordon's partner in the mine was. Jack's interest piqued. He stared into Francie's eyes that had now turned grim. He waited expectantly, not asking the question. You're not going to like this, Jack, she said. Chapter 21. Final Confrontation. The noonday sun shined brightly on the ornate brass door knocker. A strong bronze-tanned hand reached for it, lifted it, and slapped it against the striker 3 times. The hand released it, and the visitor waited patiently for the heavy door to open. A moment, then maybe 2, and the door swung open. Sally Ballard's blue eyes focused on the man in the doorway. Good morning, Sally, John Randolph said in his usual polite, gentlemanly voice. Is the senator in? He asked. Why, yes, he is, Mr. Randolph. Won't you please come in? She swung the big door wide open and stepped back to allow the Deputy Justice Director to step into the large vestibule of Senator Ballard's magnificent mansion. He stepped in and removed his hat. What a nice surprise, Sally said. Dad will be pleased to see you. Follow me, won't you please? She gestured toward the hallway. Dad, she called as she started to lead. Mr. Randolph is here to see you. The big man emerged from a room down the hall. He smiled broadly as he saw his old friend and stepped forward to meet him, extending his hand in greeting. They met and shook at the edge of the vestibule. Good to see you, John, the senator said. Tell me, what brings you here this fine day? His words trailed off, and his eyes darkened as his gaze passed over Randolph's shoulder to see the man in the black broadcloth suit and black flat-crowned Stetson step through the open doorway behind Randolph. Ballard's jaw dropped. Surprised? Jack Clayton's quiet voice said. I thought you were dead? Clayton supplied, striding forward, his slate blue eyes level. Why, yes, Ballard stammered. But how? I mean, he forced a nervous smile. I'm so glad to see you, Jack, he gushed as he hurried forward to meet the G-man. He thrust out his hand. Jack stood stock still. He made no effort to take the senator's hand. His eyes were cold and accusatory. What's wrong, Jack? Don't you know me? I know what you are, but I don't know who you are, Jack said steely. But I know who you aren't. He waited a beat, letting the big man react. You're not Senator Joshua P. Ballard. In fact, I'm sure you had him killed. The big man's face flushed red, anger seething. Sally rushed forward. What are you saying? He's not my father? Maybe he is and maybe he isn't. It all depends on who you are. Why, I'm Sally Ballard. You know us. Don't you remember how you rescued us from those kidnappers? Oh, I remember all right, Jack said to Ballard. It was a clever way for you to replace the real senator. Be in Washington, have power, be in on privy information. Added believability, sanctioned by me. Then added, planting the girl in our office was a stroke of genius. Nothing has gone right since. Everything I did, you knew about and put obstacles in my way. You were behind that arms deal with Alexander King down in Texas and the trouble in the Black Hills. I should have guessed it before now. You're crazy, Jack, Ballard said. Are you sure you're all right? What's happened to you? Give it up, John Randolph said with disgust in his voice. We know that Joshua P. Ballard was partners with Ed Gordon in the Glory Hill mine. Yes, I was. Ed was an old friend, and I invested in his mine when he needed financing. What's wrong with that? That doesn't prove anything. The real Ballard was friends with Ed Gordon, Clayton said. He never concerned himself with operations of the mine. Once you took Ballard's place, you sent Ben Colby out there to take over. That's preposterous. If I'm not Senator Ballard, then who am I? A power-hungry would-be despot out to satisfy your own greed, no matter what the cost is to others. Now, I don't really care who you are. You say you are Senator Ballard. We can prosecute you as the senator. It will send a message to Washington and other crooked politicians. By the way, Jack added, we got them all, including Reagan. He neglected to tell him they were dead. The big man went silent, just stared sullenly. There's U.S. Marshals outside waiting for you, Jack said. Then to Randolph quietly, John, would you tell them to come in? Randolph nodded and strode toward the open door. You're not taking me, are you? The girl demanded, a hint of hysteria in her voice. If he's not my father, I didn't know it. She angrily turned to the senator. What did you do with my real father, you oaf? Nice try, Jack said. Won't work. Her eyes flashed with anger, and she raised her arm to strike him, but was restrained by a gripping hand as one of the marshals came up behind her. That will be quite enough, miss, the marshal said. Another marshal stepped up to the big man and took his arm. This way, sir, he said, leading him down the hallway behind the other marshal and the girl. The big man, halted near the doorway, turned and glared at Clayton. I'm not finished yet, he growled. You haven't seen the last of me? I'll get yet you. I'm the biggest trouble you've ever seen. Then you'd better get a fast horse, Jack replied calmly. Jack Clayton will return. In Trouble Rides a Fast Horse.